Hey buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Gilbin is the name, and Hearthstone is the game, and these are 5 cards that have been brought back to life with Knights of the Frozen Throne. In other words, these are cards that haven't seen play in a really long time, but because of changing metas and all the new cards and the synergies that come up with new cards, and perhaps even the things that need to be answered in the meta, these are cards that have suddenly seen a resurgence in play and are becoming popular parts of the meta, which I always think is really fantastic. It's nice when old cards, whether they've been played or not in the past, get another chance in the limelight and are able to be brought back to life and still make an impact on Hearthstone. So let's go ahead and jump into all 5 of these cards, talk about them, what they mean, and how they're changing the game, and how likely they are to stay relevant in the future. Up first is the Black Knight, a long-forgotten tech card that has made its return to answer the most popular card in Knights of the Frozen Throne, which is the Lich King, which is seeing play in a ton of decks, often whether he actually deserves to be or not. But the Black Knight's a really natural answer to that, and of course, Taunt Druid is a thing too, and the Black Knight handles taunts pretty well, so it works against a Druid meta often as well. And frankly, there's just a lot of big taunts with things like Obsidian Statue and Priest, and there's always Paladins running around with Tyrian Forging. So the Black Knight has found a home in this meta where he answers pretty much every deck except for the hyper-aggressive ones. And frankly, even then, you can do some things against like Dread Corsairs and Pirate Warrior, for instance. So a good fit for the meta right now. And you'll note actually in this video, I am including some data from hsreplay.net. There's a chart beneath the image of the card there that basically shows a timeline for the rise in popularity for this card. I didn't want to include the specific numbers because I'm not sure if those are available for free to everybody on hsreplay.net. I recommend you just go check out their site if you're looking for the really detailed specifications on a card's popularity. But I did just want to give you a general idea and substantiate why these cards are on the list. You can see there, right as the expansion released, the Black Knight has essentially steadily climbed in popularity as people realize just how good he is at answering this meta. Now, I'm not sure the Black Knight's going to stay that relevant and that popular. I think the Lich King will dwindle in popularity as the expansion ages and people realize he's not always just the best pick for any given control deck, that he only really works in certain environments. People will also probably realize the Black Knight's not that fantastic against things like Obsidian Statue, because often the Black Knight's just killed from that Death Rattle effect. So I think as the meta gets faster and as people kind of learn what's really quite good as answers and really figure out that silence might be a better answer often than just the Black Knight, I think his popularity will dwindle. He might still show up in control decks, and especially those like Reno-style decks or Kazakh-style decks that don't have room to run a ton of good cards, and this is just another great option to fill in the gaps, essentially, because it can only run 1 copy of any given card. So I'm happy the Black Knight is back. I missed this card. It's awfully thematically appropriate for Knights of the Frozen Throne as well, so that's pretty cool to see. It's really good that tech cards like this do exist, and this certainly won't be the last tech card on this list. Up next is a taunt card, the opposite of the Black Knight, but it's a cheap one for Warlock. It is the Voidwalker, of course. And Voidwalker historically has been played a ton in Hearthstone because throughout Hearthstone's history, Zoo Warlock has been one of the most prominent and consistent archetypes across metas. But lately, in the last expansion or two, Zoo Warlock took a deep nosedive and hasn't been played at all really in the Unguro meta because Discard just didn't work, and other decks did the Zoo style of play better, like Murloc Paladin, for instance. So, of course, Warlocks basically disappeared in Unguro, and Voidwalker disappeared with them. But Warlock is making a little bit of a resurgence here in Knights of the Frozen Throne. It's certainly still not at the very top of popularity of classes. Druid holds that rank quite firmly. But as you can see here from the chart here and the data from hsreplay.net, Voidwalker did pick up a ton of steam in 2 different ways, right? He's showing up in Zoo lists, of which I've seen some standard non-discard Zoo Warlock lists. But also, he is a demon, and a cheap demon, which works really well with Bloodreaver Gul'dan because he's a taunted demon, which means that he can help slow down your opponents when you play that big Bloodreaver Gul'dan battle cry turn and you summon all your demons back. It's nice to have a couple taunt demons. So this gives you some stability in the early game, ways to contest an early game board to survive to get Bloodreaver Gul'dan. Then actually gives you another tool to survive once you play Bloodreaver Gul'dan. So Voidwalker, essentially across 2 different archetypes of Warlock, has come back. And it's a really solid, strong card. It works really well for Warlock and what Warlock wants to do. So I'm happy to see this fella back, mostly because I'm happy to see Warlock back at least a little bit. Still, long way to go for Warlock to reach the levels of popularity it's had in the past, but at least they're getting a little something, and you can tell if you look at that chart, that little something is already starting to fade. Warlock's popularity is moving downwards, but we did get a brief glimpse of Voidwalker, and I hope he'll stick around even longer than that. And up next is Kazakh, the Mean Streets of Gadgets and card, the successor to Reno style decks, the card that's supposed to empower those Singleton, Highlander, whatever you want to call them, Reno decks, which is what I call them. Kazakh has certainly been popular in the past. When in the Mean Streets era, he did a lot of work to fill in the gaps for Reno Jackson. But as Unguro came out, Kazakh really fell off hard. With a card rotation, it's hard for a card like this to find success because there just aren't enough cards in a standard format pool to really fill in all of the spots you need in a 30-card deck list, because it's just average card quality goes down when you have less cards to choose from. So Kazakh similarly lost a lot of popularity. As you can see from the chart there, very low levels of play for the last couple months, but one deck basically and one card essentially brought Kazakh back to life all at once, and that is Shadow Reaper Anduin for Priest, and the Raza shenanigans you can get up to with Shadow Reaper Anduin and his crazy machine gun style hero power. That combo and just how powerful it is instantly catapulted Kazakh back into the limelight. Suddenly he had a spot in that list, and frankly a pretty important spot. You can still play that deck without Kazakh, but Kazakh is ultimately a very strong card and a good fit for that deck. So he made a resurgence, and as you can see, a little bit of a big hump there at the very beginning in popularity that has started to dwindle a little bit, but still is making the cut. Priest, it looks like, is going to be a pretty high-tier deck in the Frozen Throne meta, so that means Kazakh is here for at least a little while, and that's something I'm very happy to see. I'm glad that this card and the Reno archetype, or that Reno style of play, lives on through Kazakh. And then the fourth card I'd like to point out might surprise some people. It is the Druid card from Whispers of the Old Gods. It's Meyer Keeper. Now, Meyer Keeper had seen varying levels of play in the past. This is a card that showed up occasionally in slower ramp style Druid decks, but lately it got abandoned. It got lost in the shuffle of all the different access to ramp cards, particularly in the Jade archetype with things like Jade Blossom took the place of Meyer Keeper, and Meyer Keeper became a much less important card for Druid to run, as you can see from that popularity chart down there below. But as you'll note, after the expansion hit, this card has continued to rise in popularity because, of course, for two reasons. Number one, Druid has just gotten super, super popular. But beyond that, I think Druid started to realize, thanks to the card Ultimate Infestation, you can go super heavy on ramp in Druid now. In other words, you can ramp with Wild Growth, you can ramp with Jade Blossom, you can add in Nourish ramps, and you can even add in Meyer Keepers for ramp, because you know the faster you get to 10 mana, the faster you can play that Ultimate Infestation, which refills your hand anyway, so all that risk, all the disadvantage of ramping, which typically costs you card advantage, is mitigated thanks to your Ultimate Infestation, so you can be really, really greedy with your ramp cards like Meyer Keeper. So suddenly Meyer Keeper starts showing up in lists, becomes popular in Druid, and Druid being the most popular class in the meta right now means Meyer Keeper is frankly one of the most played cards in Hearthstone, which I never thought I would see again, but suddenly here we are, and Meyer Keeper is darn near topping the charts, and if that chart is any indication, he's not losing steam anytime soon. And then finally, for my last card that has been brought back to life in Frozen Throne, it is the Spellbreaker, the go-to silence minion in Hearthstone. That honor used to belong to Ironbeak Owl, but once Ironbeak Owl got nerfed and moved to 3 mana, Spellbreaker becomes a vastly more efficient play than Ironbeak Owl. For only a mana more, you get so much more as far as stats are concerned, making Spellbreaker the default go-to silence card in the neutral set. And there's a lot of stuff that's very valuable to silence. If you're playing in an aggro deck, it's nice to have silences to move through the vast array of giant, annoying taunts that exist. because you need to do damage to your opponent's face. So Pirate Warriors, guess what? They're running Spellbreakers. And they were a little bit in the past, by the way. That's why you can see some slight deviations there in the popularity. This was not an unplayed card. It just saw a huge rise in popularity recently with Frozen Throne. So aggro decks like to run it to move through big taunts, silence those Tyrians, silence those Obsidian statues, silence the Lich Kings, etc. But, you know, even mid-range decks sometimes have to deal with those annoying threats. There's a lot of just value bundled into minions these days, so being able to silence those off is really powerful. And then finally, control decks often even can utilize a silence. So basically, everybody right now likes Spellbreaker, and everybody can find good ways to use Spellbreaker. Silences, I think, are more important as a tech card than they've ever been before in Hearthstone. I don't think we've ever seen Silence do quite as much work as it does these days, just because of all the big nasty stuff in this sort of slower, super heavy control meta that's developed over the first 10 days or so of Frozen Throne. Cards like this tend to get a lot of value in any given archetype, so that's why Spellbreaker has shot right to the top as far as popularity is concerned, and frankly looks like he might be getting even more popularity in the near future as more and more people figure out that this is probably one of the best tech cards in Hearthstone right now. And there you have it. Those are my 5 cards that have been brought back to life by Knights of the Frozen Throne. Frankly, I think this list could have been a little longer. I'm sure you've seen some cards out there that have been brought into popularity that had been forgotten before the new expansion hit. I think a lot of different classes and different archetypes have examples of that. So I'm sure you could provide some great examples in the comments of additional cards you've seen that you'd forgotten existed or hadn't seen in years. I'd like to hear those myself. I didn't want to make a list that just included everything. I wanted to pick the 5 that stood out the most to me and that the data really showed. Although I completely recognize there are probably a lot more cards out there. So share those in the comments below. What do you guys think? What cards do you think might still see a rise in popularity as this meta starts to figure itself out and starts to settle in the ensuing weeks of Knights of the Frozen Throne? I'm curious which cards you think have really answered the meta that nobody's figured out yet, but you figured it out and you think soon the meta will adapt and bring that card into relevance once again. But until then, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, game on.